Hey guys, and welcome to Politics Snaps. Now you're about to watch an interview I did with the veteran journalist and broadcaster Iain Dale. So he talks a lot about Brexit, about what a Corbyn Government would mean for the UK. I think it's a lot of really interesting stuff. So I hope you enjoy. If so, please do leave a like. And if you wanted to subscribe, I would not be angry. I would be very grateful for any subscriptions. So thank you very much and hope you enjoy. Great. So I'm delighted to be joined by Iain Dale, so the author, radio presenter, political activist. So first of all, Iain, thank you very much for your time.
Political activist?
Well,
I haven't done political activism for about 10 years.
Retired political
So out of date.
Retired political activist then. I'm very grateful for your time, so thank you so much. So the obvious thing to start with is Brexit, I guess.
If you have to.
How do you think the Brexit process is going?
It's not a shambles, isn't it? I voted to leave, but I certainly didn't think that the government would be so incompetent to leave us in this position, and it's quite difficult. And we're sitting here talking about this the day after the vote of confidence in Theresa May, which obviously that didn't get anywhere. But it's very difficult to see where we go from here.
Yeah.
And for people of an older vintage, I said on the radio last night, so well, where do we go from here? Is it down to the lake I fear? And it went over everyone's head, which is a lyric from a 1980s song from a group called Haircut 100. And anybody watching this who's heard of Haircut 100 should get a prize.
I will have to, I'll put a link in the description. So obviously Obviously, the kind of big thing now is Theresa May is trying to offer talks and Labour's so far refusing. I mean, do you think that's irresponsible?
What, Labour refusing?
Yeah.
Yes, I think it is. Now, they are right that she should have tried to reach out to not just Labour but all the other parties well before now.
Yeah.
And she's consistently refused to. However, if you're the leader of the opposition and over the last year you've constantly said, well, we want to have talks with the Prime Minister, and she says no, and then she says yes, and then you say no. It's a bit of a weird position. I think there's a lot of disquiet in the Labour Party over this, in particular because it's allowed the Tories to say, well, Jeremy Corbyn is quite happy to meet Hezbollah, Hamas, the IRA with no preconditions, and yet won't meet the British Prime Minister. Tells you all you need to know, really, doesn't it?
I mean, as somebody who voted for Brexit, do you think Theresa May's deal would actually honour the result at all?
Well, she would argue it did because we'd be coming out of the Common Agricultural Policy, the Fisheries Policy, sure, ending freedom of movement, blah, blah, blah. So to that extent, yes. But I regarded it as actually worse than staying in because of all the other things where effectively we would still be in the customs union. We would have to obey EU rules with no say how they were drafted. So it was a sort of Brexit in name only kind of deal. Now, she still seems to think that this deal is still alive. I mean, utterly delusional. When you suffer a parliamentary defeat of that magnitude and you still think that you can get it through somehow, well, if she does, it will be the biggest political Houdini act since Houdini.
I mean, so if it's... I mean, what do you think the kind of fundamental conditions are to honour the Brexit vote? What are the kind of things that Theresa May needs to achieve?
Well, I'm not even sure that's possible now because of the way they've mishandled it, because everyone says, well, you can't leave with no deal. Well, yeah, if you don't have a deal, then you have no deal. I mean, there's no middle way there. You either have a deal or you don't. Yeah. Now, the only way of avoiding no deal is to extend Article 50, yeah, which I think is what's going to happen now, I'm afraid. And I think I wrote quite a few newspaper columns in the couple of weeks in the run-up to the vote, warning Brexit-supporting Conservative MPs that they need to think very carefully about how they voted, because if they voted down the deal, bear in mind I'm not a supporter of the deal, but if they voted down the deal, we wouldn't be leaving on March the 29th. And if we don't leave on March the 29th, there is then a possibility that Brexit might never happen, because there could be so much pressure that there's a second referendum, and it could be that Remain won a second referendum. Now, if there were a second referendum, I don't think Remain would win, but who can say in all certainty?
I mean, what do you think the impact would be on British democracy if there was a second referendum?
I think the turnout in a second referendum would probably be a lot lower. So there you have a problem. Say Remain won.
Do you think some leaders might boycott it?
I think there would be. Well, let's start from the beginning. In the Channel 4 Brexit film, one of the main points that I took away from that were these 3 million people that had never really taken part in democracy before, and the Leave campaign were told, well, get them on board and you've won, and they clearly did get them on board. Well, can you imagine many of those voting again? Saying, well, look, I voted for something, it hasn't been delivered, why would I bother to vote again? So I think there's a problem there. Say Remain won by 16.4 million votes to 15.4 million votes. The Leave side of the argument would say, well, that's not the same mandate as Leave had before. 1 million fewer people voted to Remain. If it was 52-48 to Remain, do we then have another referendum 2 years later? Best of 3, best of 5, best of 7? The country would be even more divided than it is now. And if Remain won, they would argue, well, the opinion has clearly changed. But I mean, I don't want to predict civil unrest, but it would be hugely damaging for our democracy, in my view. But I understand people who say, well, it's different. I mean, we're nearly 3 years on now. It's not just 2 years. They say, well, all the lies that were told, ignoring the fact the lies on the Remain side that were told, European army, I could go on. And I think even people like me who effectively have had the political virus for years and can't quite shake it off, I mean, I just wonder whether I would really want to be an active participant in the political process. I mean, I'm not an activist anymore, but I'm still sort of obsessed by politics, and still what I do in life is based on politics. But even I've got slightly weary of it all.
I mean, do you think it would really fuel extremism? I mean, could we end up with a kind of British-style Front National, or I know they've renamed themselves, but Alternative for Germany or something like that?
We've never had that here. That's not to say that we couldn't.
Although UKIP are going in a different direction.
UKIP are going in that direction, but luckily they haven't got the sort of charismatic leader that an extremist party, whether it's on the left or the right, needs. Gerard Batten is many things, but he's not charismatic. He's charismatically challenged. However, Tommy Robinson is not charismatically challenged, and whatever I might think of him as an individual, I can see him or someone like him coming to the fore and really capitalising on the disquiet that there is with mainstream politicians. That there may well be some equivalent movement on the left, I don't know. What I can see happening if we take part in the European elections, I can see Nigel Farage starting a new political movement which could sweep the board in those elections. I'm not saying that will happen. I hope we don't take part in these elections. If Article 50 were to be extended, and assuming that it's only for 3 months, I don't think there would be any need to run British candidates in those elections. You just have the existing MEPs and carry them forward for 3 months. However, in the last couple of days, there is talk that Article 50 could be extended from 9 to 12 months in the expectation of another referendum. Now, in that case, I think there would be a lot of pressure for there to be European elections. I mean, I have to think, I mean, I've never not voted in an election. Would I boycott European elections just on principle? I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, as a Brexiteer, obviously someone who stood for the Conservative Party, does it concern you that Brexit could sort of turn out to be the way Corbyn takes power, as in by splitting the Conservative Party or by splitting certain business interests from the Conservative Party, that kind of Corbyn could come down the middle and that's how he becomes Prime Minister? Does it worry you that the final beneficiary of the Brexit process could be the far left or the hard left?
I think it's very difficult to predict because, of course, Labour is just a split, well, possibly in a different way, but they are as split as the Tories. So if he caved in to propose a second referendum, he would have people resigning from his front bench. There would be a lot of, I say a lot, I mean, I can't quantify what a lot means in these circumstances, but there would be people who decided that they couldn't vote Labour again, particularly in northern marginal seats. So you could argue that it would save Theresa May's bacon, that there would be, that Tories could gain a lot of seats in the north and in the Midlands. I think it would be the most difficult election to predict if there were a general election in the next few months. But of course it also presents somebody like me with a real dilemma. If Theresa May is still the leader of the Tory Party at that time, and she is still advocating this dead duck deal, could I vote Conservative and endorse that deal?
So can you see yourself abstaining to try and...
I wouldn't abstain. I don't believe in abstaining. I think it's a coward's way out. So I would have to vote. I certainly couldn't vote Labour. I did vote Lib Dem in the last local elections purely because my local Conservative council is corrupt and terrible.
Okay.
I have voted UKIP, I have voted Green in the past, again as a protest vote. So I wouldn't, I suppose I could spoil my ballot paper, but again, that's a kind of a coward's way out. I'm actually registered to vote in 2 different areas, both of which the MPs are really good friends of mine. So I could cop out and say, well, I'm just voting for the individual. But of course, both Greg Clark, Keith Simpson, they're both arch Remainers.
Yeah. I mean, do you think, so obviously with kind of Brexit becoming the new big thing, have you been surprised by how vicious British political debate has become?
I think it's become vicious on social media.
Yeah.
It's become vicious in certain parts of the public arena. There's a lot of concentration on the Anna Soubry incident over the last few days. That actually isn't anything new. Nigel Farage has to cope with that virtually every day.
Yeah.
That's not to excuse what those people did. I don't agree with it. It was thuggish. Shouldn't have done it. But you do have to be careful what you say, possibly more than before. I mean, Anna Soubry herself has called people fascists and Nazis.
Yeah.
And I've gone over the top on social media sometimes, and because it's so instantaneous. If somebody writes something and you're sort of idling away the time on a train, and you think, how dare you write that, and fire something back. And I have tried to not do that so much, and I mean quite a few times recently I've sort of counted to 10 or deleted a tweet that I was going to send, but inevitably from time to time you have a relapse, and I think the state of political discourse in this country is shocking at the moment, and the only way that changes is if people make a conscious effort to change their ways.
I mean, how bad do you think a Corbyn government would be? I mean, would it be kind of, would you regard it as like a normal Labour government?
We'd be eating the bark off the trees, James. That's what we'd be doing. Look, there is a side of me that would love to see it, just to see what would happen. But the
social experiment.
Yeah, exactly. But the patriot in me thinks it would be an absolute unmitigated disaster.
Yeah.
I mean, if we think that we would have economic problems after a no-deal Brexit, that would pale into insignificance compared to the damage that a Corbyn government would do to the economy. But of course, until it happens, we can think these things all we like. But my grandmother, back in about 1976, when I was 13, said to me, never trust Labour because they always spend more money than they can afford. And it's true, it always has been true, and it certainly would be true under a future Labour government led by Jeremy Corbyn. There is a school of thought that thinks Jeremy Corbyn won't be leader of the Labour Party come the next election. I was interviewing Francis Beckett the other day, who's a real old lefty, a huge sort of past in the Labour Party, somebody who I thought was a down-the-line supporter of Jeremy Corbyn. And he's written a book which I published last year called Jeremy Corbyn and the Strange Rebirth of Labour England.
Okay.
And he's just written a play about Clement Attlee, and I came into the studio and I did an interview with him, and at the end of it we were talking about Corbyn, and he suddenly blurted out that he thought Corbyn should stand down as leader of the Labour Party. And I said, what? And his view is that he doesn't really want to be Prime Minister. He knows he wouldn't be a very good Prime Minister, so they should, and if he stood down now, he would forever be a hero of the left. Okay. So therefore he should be replaced by someone like Emily Thornberry, Tom Watson, Angela Rayner. Well, that would be an interesting turn of events, wouldn't it, if that came to pass? I'm
assuming that would rely on Corbyn deciding to go, as in he couldn't be pushed out if these people decided to try and push him.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
One final curveball. So I was thinking literally on the way up here, if we'd had a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty or on the Constitution, or obviously they're kind of the same thing, so if Gordon Brown or Tony Blair granted a referendum and presumably would have been rejected, do you think we would then have had Brexit?
Possibly not. I think there's all sorts of factors that have contributed to Brexit. I think undoubtedly the austerity policies of the last few years have done. I think unsustainable levels of immigration, or what some people see as unsustainable levels of immigration, have done. I think a general distrust of politicians. It's nothing new that people don't trust politicians. Look at the cartoons from the 1800s. I mean, we tend to think this is a new development. It isn't at all. I think the fact that there is a perception, a real perception in my view, that the EU has control over aspects of our national life, which it shouldn't. We hear a lot about the concept of subsidiarity, government down at the lowest level. There's no evidence that that's ever really been promoted by the EU. We see successive EU budgets not being signed up. I mean, there are all sorts of different areas of corruption in the EU, and in the end, people just think that we would be better at managing our own affairs than subcontracting all of this to Brussels and paying them this inordinate amount of money. Now, I'm constantly astonished by this sort of feeling of almost obsessive love of the EU that some of these hashtag FBPE people seem to have, that they feel more loyalty to the EU than they do their own country. I don't understand that. I never have. And unfortunately at the moment, we've now got what I call the irreconcilables on both extremes of the argument. So you've got the John Redwoods, Jacob Rees-Moggs on one side, and then you've got the Dominic Grieves, Anna Soubry's on the other, and never the
sharing
twain.
A party, is it?
Well, indeed, and never the twain shall meet. However, on other issues, they can agree. So all successful political parties are coalitions, and the Conservative Party has always been a massive coalition of different people, from the sort of hang 'em and flog 'em Teddy Taylors, John Carlyle's in the 1980s, to people like Heidi Allen now. Now, in theory, they ought to be able to coexist within the same party, but I think there is going to be a debate as to whether the party is going to split in the next year or two, and whether you have a more sort of CDU type Conservative Party versus a much more hardline party, sort of a bit like what UKIP used to be. So sort of, and maybe it'll be a bit like the relationship between the CDU and the CSU in Germany, where effectively they are one party, but they are separate.
Yeah.
Now, electorally,
they have to agree not to run against each other.
Yeah, well, that's
something.
the problem, because that's the way to guarantee a Labour government. As we saw in the 1980s when the SDP split from Labour, that guaranteed Margaret Thatcher 2 extra terms. The same thing could happen here in reverse if they're not careful.
And you think that's a realistic possibility?
It's a possibility. I think it's not a probability at the moment. It's a possibility. But I think all Tory MPs need to be careful what they wish for in these circumstances, and actually the good thing about the Tory Party is the personal relationships have generally survived any rancour that's happened. I do think now that it's being tested. So I think people have to rein themselves in a little, because there could be untold damage to the cause of the right in general if they don't.
Iain, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.